Hey, hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira, and this is our weekly live stream. Appreciate you being here. This live stream is going to be a bit different. We're actually going to do a live interview with Dan Collins. If you've been seeing his recently put up YouTube channel, Chaos Incorporated, pretty incredible, great stuff going on there that he says. So we wanted to bring Dan on so he can give his perspective on things. He's lived in China for some 20 plus years, ran businesses there, and he's back in the States. So he has a really good viewpoint of how things are in China, how things are in the US. And so it's not just emotional types of talk. This is the real deal, real truth coming on. And so that's why we wanted to bring Dan. So Neil Han, thank you for being here. Anthony, how you doing? First time I've seen you here. Welcome aboard. If you are new, go ahead and type in new, where you're from. And Q, if you have questions, go ahead and type in a big letter Q. And Vincent is here. Hello, Vincent. Good morning. And we'll go ahead and see if we can get your questions in there for Dan. So if you have questions along the way, go ahead and type a big Q and a question, and we'll see if we can get that in to Dan. So again, thanks for being here. Jeff, Harold B. How you doing, Harold? Marshall, Topola. Good to see you, Marshall. First time I've seen you on board as well. Welcome aboard. So we'll be firing up the interview shortly with Dan. Um, just let us know your thoughts, questions, comments, and we'll see if we can go ahead and get through some of those. Patrick Bateman, how you doing? So again, aloha to one and all. I'll be with you guys in about 10 more seconds. Thanks. So hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion TV. As mentioned, glad you all could be here. And as mentioned, also, this is going to be a little bit different live stream where we're going to have Dan Collins join us. Dan Collins, he is an engineer and entrepreneur. Spent 20 years in mainland China running businesses, and now he's back in Miami, where he has founded several companies, including Hippogriff Data Security, a cybersecurity firm. And he has been a popular guest on multiple platforms, including SBTV, where we were fortunate to have Dan on once. And you can catch him on his YouTube channel, Chaos Incorporated. And that is an awesome channel. So, Dan Collins, welcome aboard. How are you doing?
Thanks. Great to be back. Doing well.
Great. Glad to have you. Glad to have you back, Dan. Um, One thing I wanted to ask you, you ran several businesses in China and you're back in the States. What are some key differences between maybe the governance or the regulations of running businesses in China and compared to the US? Is there a bit more economic freedom there than here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a night and day thing. I mean, it's completely different things. So, in China, I originally was an exchange student there at Tsinghua University. It's like the MIT of China. Then I worked in General Motors. I was an engineer back in the late 90s, running all over China. Traveled different cities every week, looking at manufacturing plants, doing site audits, these kinds of things, engineering stuff. But the difference in businesses is China is led by a very practical governance. So they basically, when they reformed and opened up, they went around the world looking for best practices, different industries, recruiting industries, trying to climb the value chain all along the way. When I went to China in 1998, they basically couldn't make anything. I mean, couldn't make a decent car. When I went to China in 1998, we did 1 million cars totally in the market. General Motors, which was my first job out of school, we did 10,000 cars in the first year. They did 3 million last year. China does 27 million cars, like literally 27x growth in that 20-year time frame. It's incredible. US is going to make 13 million this year. Give you an example. It's double the US market. So, but running the businesses, China's very practical. They do what works, 0% tax to start, get you into the trade zone, make customs easy for you to export. Um, Financial crisis, I could give you examples. A local government will come around. What kind of problems you guys having? Do you need any help? Can I help you with the banks to get loans? Very proactive and focused. So in China, there's a state-owned economy, but there's a very large an even bigger private economy, and they try to manage that practically. In the U.S., it's a flip. It's a reversal of the script. So over here, most of our industries have become oligopolies. Two companies, three companies. It's not competitive. They've outsourced all their manufacturing. They're mostly running warehouses here. You look at the baby formula crisis here. We had two
Mhm.
companies making baby formula. One plant shuts down. It's 40% of the country's baby formula. Nobody bothers to restart it for 4 or 5 months. It's kind of a ridiculous. So there's no we're a quote unquote free market capitalism here. However, it's really a banker's kind of crony capitalism that's led to this whole private equity market where the people that can get access to all that previously 0% money buy up all the real companies and the real assets and consolidate it. So not very competitive. In China, on the other hand, absolute cutthroat capitalism. You have to compete. Anybody will tell you, even in the tech sector, someone will steal your idea within 24 hours. So you just have to keep innovating. You just have to keep getting better. You just have to constantly strive and get better. Otherwise, you're going to get chewed up by the competition. It's much more competitive in China.
Yeah, absolutely. I could stay on this part all day, but first, before we get into a lot of these things, you have a YouTube channel titled Chaos Incorporated, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about it because when I came across it from a tweet that you put out, I went to your channel, I watched it, and I said, "Dan is just saying some incredible stuff there." So, can you tell us a bit about your YouTube channel?
Yeah, so I've been doing kind of a public like interviews for more than 10 years. I was probably the number one guest on the Kaiser Report for about 10 years. That was on Russia Today, and that got nuked completely with the war. So I took a month, thought about it. I said, and I had a lot of requests from people to do more interviews where I was getting interviewed, things like that. So I said, what, I'm just going to do a YouTube channel and eventually develop it into a podcast so I can kind of get some of these ideas out there and kind of build a community around it. That's what started it. I think I started it about 7 days ago or so. So.
Yeah, yeah, it's still pretty fresh. I got a question came in for you. What kind of data security protection does Hippogriff provide? Uh, could you expand on that a bit for us?
So yeah, we're a managed service provider. So a lot of our business focuses around reselling services from like Zscaler, Avast, kind of network hardening. So we usually sign with a customer, annual MSP contract, and then we bring in a lot of between 7 to 10 different types of tools that we have to help harden their networks. Zscaler is probably our favorite one right now. It's Fortune 500, and we everything has gone SSL, so all the internet traffic is encrypted now. 98% used to be 0% 3, 4, 5 years ago. Most of your old firewalls don't check encrypted traffic. So there's a lot of people that run firewalls and they're pretty much useless. So we do that. We've been involved in ransomware attacks, things like that. We go through with customers checklists how to back up your data, make sure everything's secure. Basically, do whatever we think. We do a audit of the customer, then we kind of provide solutions. We do threat penetration testing, all kinds of different things.
Okay. Yeah, I think you were known as the ethical hacker. You put up right, you put up a video on YouTube titled "Global Financial System: Is It Time to Panic?" And awesome, awesome upload there. Now, one of the many things that grabbed me was when you said we are going into the revenge of the real economy. Can you share your thoughts on this?
Sure. So the last 40 years has been what I call kind of a paper printing economy in the West. It's been a bull market for bonds, 40-year bond market, bull run, lowest interest rates in the history of mankind. Even going back 6 months ago, there was $20 trillion in negative yielding bonds out there. So imagine an interest environment where inflation is 10% and you buy a negative yielding bond, you're guaranteed to lose your money in 5 years. It makes no sense. So the whole system's starting to flip. The revenge of the real economy is countries like China have focused on the real economy. U.S. professors have written about it. All societies, their living standard is based on how the productive and technical capacities you have in country and what you can do. And the United States, we have deindustrialized. You saw that in 2008. We lost 50 to 80,000 factories in a couple year time span. We print money to make up for it to keep our living standards high. We create housing bubbles, and if, all economists will tell you these are SAP bubbles, SAP, speculative asset pricing bubbles. And so the money just zooms around different places, NFTs, whatever it is, until it all crashes down, which is the point we're at right now.
Yeah, great point. Speaking of that, I have another question that came in. Because we often hear this, why is China still considered an emerging market?
So great question. I brought that exact point up for at least 5 years. It's kind of ridiculous at this point. I mean, the only country with a 5G manufacturer, they're going to be the only country in 2024 with a space station after the ISS International Space Station retires. I mean, they're so advanced. There's not one area of the U.S. economy that's more advanced than China. I can tell you that, and we can go through details of that. So at this point, it's completely ridiculous. It's a net creditor. It's everyone's world's largest trading partner. It's totally ridiculous to call China an emerging market.
Okay, all right, yeah. Peter Frowine saying spot on. So a lot of guys are agreeing with you here. Um, China also has become the manufacturer of the world, while the U.S. really doesn't have much more than that printer that's going burr every second, it seems. Can the U.S. come back economically? If so, what do they need to do? If not, how's our future? How's our future looking?
Yeah, so the U.S. economic policymakers are kind of like heroin addicts. First, they have to realize they have a problem, which they still haven't come to that conclusion. I think most of the U.S. Policymakers are kind of what I call the laptop class. None of them ever been in a factory. You see, with the Russian sanctions, we'll talk about later, they just cut off all the oil. They don't really understand how things get done in a real economy. So when you say China is the manufacturing power, absolutely. 50% of all the global commodities go into China to get processed into something else. China makes 84 million tons of steel per month. US makes 6 million. That means that China produces US annual steel production every 17 days. So the US, another example, we have one commercial shipyard left that makes 10 ocean going sea container ships a year. China makes 1,000. Okay, the car market's double. So that's kind of the old, say, like the old real economy. But even if you look at the new economy, okay, last year the U.S. E-commerce market delivered 20 billion e-commerce parcels. Sounds like a lot. While U.S. really going e-commerce, China delivered 100 billion. That's 5 times. So the Chinese economy is actually, if you look at it in real terms, is 2 to 3x the size of the United States. The reason why I mention that is when the United States imports something for $5 and sells it for $25, that's $25 on our GDP. But actually, all we've done is warehoused it and shipped it somewhere. Whereas all the real value is in China. So until the U.S. comes back, the U.S. is going to have to do a complete rethink what has gone wrong in the manufacturing center and go back to it. Now, the problem is we have so many social problems in the U.S. Good luck finding workers that aren't on drugs and that will show up for work. That is going to be a problem in reindustrializing the U.S.
Yeah, we'll see how all these things pan out there. Um, I want to show you two recent clips, though, of something Janet Yellen said and something that Joe Biden had also said, and then I'd like to get your opinion on it.
I think I was wrong then about the path that inflation would take. As I mentioned, there have been unanticipated and large shocks to the economy that have boosted energy and food prices and supply bottlenecks that have affected our economy badly that I didn't, at the time, didn't fully understand.
I know that even with today's good news, a lot of Americans remain anxious, and I understand the feeling. I grew up in a family about 100 miles from here that where the price of gas went up, you felt it. It was a discussion at the kitchen table. And there's no denying that high prices, particularly around gasoline and food, are a real problem for people. But there's every reason for the American people to feel confident that we'll meet these challenges. Because of the enormous progress we've made on the economy, the Americans can tackle inflation from a position of strength. Still a problem. We can tackle it from a position of strength.
Yeah, so I mean, Dan, here we had Yellen saying she miscalculated and didn't understand it. The it being inflation, I don't know how that's possible. I mean, I think everyone here knew kind of what was going on with it. And Biden says we are coming from a position of strength. I'm not sure what he means by that, strength. Now, every reason for American people to feel confident because of the enormous progress we've made on the economy. What's your thoughts on these two these two people?
Well, regarding Biden's late latter comments, there's a philosopher, John Ralston Saul, who says any society that can no longer tell fiction from reality is probably at the tail end of its existence. And that's really Biden at this point. I mean, coming out talking about how strong the economy is. Yellen, these people have never been right about anything. Like you print 80% of the world's money and that's ever been created in 1 year, and surprise, you've got an inflation problem. Who figures? The oil price. I can give you an example on this one. And Elon Musk says it best: if you don't build stuff, there is no stuff. So, oil refiners. We since 1979, we've built one oil refinery. So the population's up 100 million people. We've built one oil refinery. So and a lot of this is the green regulations and all this kind of stuff. So if U.S. has got to go back to start building again, that's how you're going to bring inflation down. It's not by, you know, rising interest rates will help. They basically at this point have to crash the economy to try to put any stop of lid on inflation. The problem is if you go back and look at the history of inflation, it's very rarely ever fixed in a couple years, and most of the time ends up with the total debasement of the currency.
Yeah, you brought up a great point there. Can the U.S. actually start up the manufacturing base again? Can they retool the factories, retrain the workers? I mean, we're only talking about refineries here, and there's more than just that. I mean, we're going to mention food in a bit, but I also understand another. I think it was an egg farm or facility up in flames. So, all these things happening. Can the U.S. really start up its manufacturing base again?
I think it can, but it's got to go back to the point of how did we lose all the manufacturing to begin with? So there's the whole financial system here is structured around return on investment. No, don't spend any capex. Don't with the higher tax rates. For a long time we had the highest corporate tax rates in the world, about 38%. This was pre-Trump. So the logical explanation is, and I've done this myself, working for Fortune 500 companies. You close the factories in the U.S. You get them out of there. You move them to China, and then you run everything through Hong Kong, like a third party. So you ship the goods physically from China to the U.S. You bill them out of Hong Kong, and you transfer price it. You don't record any profits. You don't put any fixed asset or people in a market with 38% corporate tax rates. That's how it led. At the end of the day, that was probably the biggest contributor, to the deindustrialization of the U.S. Why pay 38% when you can pay nothing, you know, by doing this scheme? So they've allowed the deindustrialization to happen. Now you've got to go back and say, what happened? How do we fix it? U.S. The average tool and die maker in the U.S. now is 60 years old. So there's just so much work to be done with manufacturing. You need a whole infant industries plan to come back. Basically, you're going to have to tariff the crap out of a bunch of stuff just to get U.S. to start making stuff again.
Okay, but within all of that, are the politicians they're going to have to ease quite a bit of the restrictions and regulations, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's ways you can do this smartly. I mean, China's increased their regulations, but you have to be very practical. And I'll give you an example. The Golden Gate Bridge was built out in San Francisco. Was built in less than 3 years. Okay. Recently, they've been trying to build an access road to it. It's taken 11 years for a dirt road access road because of the politicians. So, and the environmental regulations and all this stuff. So we've got to come back to a practical standard, keep everything clean. We don't want to go back to the days of the dirty air and dirty water, but you've got to make some accommodations here to get stuff built.
Yeah, completely agree there. But having said all these things, having to retool the manufacturing base, yelling not understanding inflation, when yet we had all this QE since 2008 to try and rebuild things. Did we ever really recover from the 2008 great financial crisis, or has it we truly been just kicking the can down the road?
No, what we never recovered. This is financial crisis 2.0 coming up. So the market was telling us in 2008, let the banks die. These Wall Street banks that their only existence is to print money for themselves out of the Federal Reserve and go buy assets with it. Fund hedge funds, fund private equity companies, fund the government. So it's basically a money laundering scam. The market was telling us let those guys go out of business. We didn't. We saved them. We saved them 100, we saved them full to their full amount. They even paid bonuses during the financial crisis, for God's sakes. We spent $20 trillion in the original financial crisis. Now here we are. It's going to take 10x to save it again. So that's going to be the key question. After this recession comes in and things get really dark, does the Fed have another bailout in them? Because it's going to be 10x. So they're going to come up with $200 trillion. I don't think they have it in them.
Yeah, I mean, it's often been asked, does the Fed have another Paul Volcker in there? If they don't have it in them to do this, what are they going to do? Just basically, I mean, they can't just let the economy crash, can they? Or is that what they're looking for to maybe bring in a new type of monetary system?
Well, Paul Volcker's thing was getting interest rates high, right? It was 15% Fed's fund rate at one time.
Yeah.
You needed 18% interest on a house. So that worked after a few painful years. The problem now is if you do the math on the US federal government debt, they even get up to a 5% funds rate. They're paying out $1 trillion a year in interest. So everything we have will go to interest to the banks, which printed the money from us. So there's no way high interest rates will solve it. It would just lead to a collapse. We have more than $250 billion in derivatives floating around, waiting to smack the face of the global economy when all the plumbing breaks. And that's what I'm waiting for. This whole financial crisis, we went from 40 years of money printing to COVID shocks. We print 80% of the world's money. That leads to the inflation. That leads to the war. That's going to break the financial plumbing of the global system.
Yeah, yeah, quite a bit of things going on there. I got one question that I want to throw up here. Pinch Runner says, hang on, let me look for some reason. Okay, well, it's not showing up. Let me move on to the next question here. Inflation. We're kind of touching on this. On your YouTube channel, Chaos Incorporated, you made a great point about inflation and how many things on the US side, such as services, healthcare, tuition, things like that, they've gone up. However, many things on the Chinese side, meaning they're manufacturing things like TVs, computers, electronics, they've kind of held the price. They haven't really gone up as much. Can you elaborate on this a bit and why this is so?
Sure. So this is all the China manufacturing dividend. So when and I lived this 20 years of building stuff in China. The China made everything cheaper: clothes, electronics, TVs, everything. So the China dividend was to deflate the cost of living for the average shopper in the US, the guys that go into Walmart. Walmart globalized. At one time, Walmart was 10% of China's exports. Just absolutely massive. So it dropped that down. But if you look at everything else that wasn't a China manufactured good, what an American has to touch, it's skyrocketed. Healthcare, college tuition, try to replace your brakes on your car. My good, it's like $800. I used to buy a car for $800. So yeah, so real goods and services, real goods from China kept deflation low, it kept inflation in check. Everything that was here as a service inflated, and now that game has changed. We're getting inflation on everything. The RMB is probably only just going to get stronger. China's labor rates are up 10x. They're not going to take the low price point anymore, and the money printing has overwhelmed everything, and everything's just going up out of control.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I would just want to touch on real quick. You mentioned cars. How far along in advance is China as far as electric vehicles go compared to the US?
Sure. So China had a strategy China did caught up on cars really, really fast. I'll give you an example. Guy named Lee that owns Geely Automotive, one of the successful Chinese car makers. People used to tell him he was crazy. He started a tool factory, then he started a tractor factory, then he's going to make cars, and people would criticize him like, "How can you compete with Toyota and GM and these guys?" He said, "A car, it's just four wheels, some body panels, two sofas, and a windscreen and an engine." So that was the mentality in China that just caught them up so fast. Now with electric vehicles, they saw the opportunity to leapfrog the industry. So their vehicles, pound for pound, caught up with foreign vehicles probably 5 to 8, 10 years ago. However, they don't have the brand name. Chinese consumer wanted a Shanghai Tongyong or GM or a Toyota or a Bauma, BMW or Mercedes. They didn't want a Geely or a SAIC or something. Now, with the EVs, it's a whole different industry. So they have poured in hundreds of billions of dollars into EV. They poured hundreds of billions into cattle, controlling the batteries. So they have a lock now. They're very strong on batteries, and they're 50% of the world's market for EVs. So I think you'll see Chinese EVs competing all over the world. And basically, U.S. has Tesla, which is still the leader and probably always will be. But the Detroit big three are struggling to catch up.
Yeah, completely agree there. But it's got to be tough, and I think it is even getting tougher for U.S. manufacturers to go ahead and even get the resources because my understanding is a lot of the resources they do go into China to be refined, so they do have first dibs. Let's say our first crack on resources that a lot of people may not understand yet.
And that's a good point, and that goes along with the semiconductors, right? So
Right.
I'm pretty locked in the automotive industry here. They still don't have chips. I mean, a chip today that was $3.50 can go for $70, and they pay it just to get the chips. There's 10,000 Ford F-150 sitting in parking lots waiting for the chips. Why? We don't have we have some of the stronger chip manufacturers making some of the more advanced stuff, but we don't have a lot. They're not making the average chips. It's all in China and Japan. They're getting the chips for their car makers. We're not. Massive, massive hit economically. It goes from chips. You kind of hinted it's probably around rare earth. We have zero rare earth supply chain in the U.S. and we're never going to get it. We have Molycorp, but it's just light rare earth. It's not heavy rare earth. We have the parts. If you go into the U.S. to buy an aftermarket part, everything's from China. Everything. And I don't think these people in the U.S., the policymakers, they don't realize how materially dependent the U.S. now is on China for everything. If the boats stop showing up in the port of Long Beach, the U.S. will eat itself due to lack of everything in a week.
Yeah, then I came across a report saying, as far as Taiwan anyway, is is it because or part of it because of its capability to produce probably the world's most advanced semiconductors, the reason why there's this kind of
Yeah, absolutely. They have
conversation
the
about
technical.
Taiwan.
Yeah, Taiwan Semiconductor has the technical capability the U.S. guys don't have in terms of a foundry. They can make 3 Newton meter chip. And nobody in the U.S. can do that. The CEO of Intel was asked, I think a week ago or so, I saw on CNBC. They said, "When will U.S. be able to get out of depending on Taiwan for chips?" He flat out said, "Never." So that's the reality of it. I mean, Taiwan Semiconductor is building a new plant in Arizona, but it's not going to be the most advanced stuff. Intel is going to go back into fab production, but they're not going to be as advanced as Taiwan Semi in that area. So, um, yeah, no, they're technically very, very capable, and it's questionable if the U.S. will be able to catch up. China themselves are racing to catch up with Taiwan Semiconductor, and they hire anybody they can out of there just to catch up.
Okay, yeah, because I believe the Intel CEO or someone high up in Intel's chain said they were going to open a plant in Cleveland, and he said it may take 3 years or so. But do we have 3 years? And even given that 3 years, is it going to be comparable to what's going on in Taiwan?
We don't. I mean, we don't have 3 years. We already are in a chip shortage. I mean, it's exhaustive all through the industry. And the interesting thing how a lot of this started was that when the U.S. blackballed Huawei, Huawei went and bought 5 years worth of chips, and I think that's what triggered this massive shortage that's happened in the chip sector. So I think that's the trigger nobody really talks about. But yeah, the only thing at this point that can happen is demand destruction because nobody can get chips.
Okay. Yeah, kind of feels like we're kind of running out of time here. And you did mention that two-thirds of the world may probably go bankrupt, and we have not even seen the start of the food shortage yet. And that being said, how bad do you think the food shortage situation is going to get in, and how economically of a hit are, let's say, the middle class going to take?
That really keeps me up at night, the food shortage issue, because not only the wheat that's not getting out of the Ukraine or not getting out of Russia, Russia's on sanctions. They can't even sell it. They're two-fifths, three-fifths of the world's wheat exports. So you're going to have massive calorie issues in their main customer areas, which are North Africa, most of Africa, Indonesia, some other places. Um, so we're going to lose the wheat harvest. I mean, it's not just me talking about it. The governments are telling us. I mean, they're talking about we could have 1 billion people at risk of starvation. And it doesn't take much. This is going to light the world on fire. So we saw the Arab Spring.
Yeah.
There's a statistical calculation when food prices, your basic grain food price rises to about 40% of your income, people hit the streets. So I think by the end of the summer, we're going to have people all over the streets, all over the world. You're seeing it already: Sri Lanka, Peru, Pakistan. It's just going to spread. And most countries are bankrupt, including the United States. They're already in a default in a way they've been since 2008. So that's where I see going. We've had trillions of dollars already wiped off the stock market this year, and everyone's there's going to be a real focus on real economies in the future. Energy, food, those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to the beginning of the year where you put out a tweet about Nordstrom 2, and I'll put that tweet up here. Nordstrom 2 versus the old Soviet built network. The old network is the base of wealth for Ukraine oligarchs collecting gas transit fees. Coincidence that the war breaks out right before it goes online? Coincidence or something else, Dan?
Oh, at this point, you'd have to guess it's something else because, as I mentioned, that old Soviet-built network, and they're still collecting. Russia's still shipping the gas. Ukraine's still charging the transit fees, and it's still going on to Germany and other places. A lot of people don't realize you can't just shut off the gas. You can't just shut off the oil. The reason is, even if Saudi Arabia, Russia has 5 to 6 billion barrels, a day that they produce. You just take that out of the market. Even if Saudi or U.S. or whoever had that capacity, there's no ocean-going ships to get it to Europe. There's no terminals to take it out. So it's really a question in like Germany: are you going to shut down your entire factory network? Because 95% of German factories run off natural gas. So it is bizarre coincidence, just as this Ukrainian Soviet built network, which funds all their oligarchs, is about to get taken offline by Nord Stream 2, the war erupts. And it's not just Putin that went in. The shellings, you can look at it mathematically. The Ukrainians were shelling the breakaway provinces about 200 a month. Then it went to 500. Then it was 1,000. Then it was 2,000 shellings a month of citizens in those breakaway provinces. And finally, Putin went in. So were they itching for a fight? I can't imagine so. I mean, the country's destroyed, but we know days before Putin invaded, they didn't think there was ever going to be invasion. Zelensky was making fun of people at the Bavarian Munich Security Conference 3 days before the invasion, telling people there's not going to be invasion. So I don't think they planned on that, but they definitely wanted to get rid of Nord Stream 2. So who knows? I think that history is yet to be written. We don't really know.
Okay, let me get to a few questions here. I'm pulling this up from a different feed here. The question: how is China able to achieve so much progress without being a democratic country? It's a communist country, and some describe it as totalitarian.
Sure. So it's a communist country politically, but economically it's completely capitalist. The best capitalists you ever meet are going to be in China. So they keep tight political control. Absolutely. Do people like that? Some do. Most people, most Chinese, they want to make money. They want to improve their family life. They want to. That's their main focus at this stage, and it has been for 20, 30 years. Um, I talked before earlier a little bit about some of the practicality of the tools. They had very low tax rates. They do almost everything the opposite of the U.S. So we're seeing now China's reducing their interest rates They're expanding the money supply, so it's kind of an opposite. They are right now. This is in been a I've talked about how China's rising for 20 years. Today it's difficult. So I've heard rumors out of areas outside Shanghai that their GDP is down 40% year over year. And that's never going to be published officially. But that's all due to the COVID lockdowns. Their base economy is still very, very strong on what they can get done. So it's all about getting things done, getting the product, making it, getting it out, that kind of thing. That's how they've been able to continually progress over these last 30 years.
All right. You know, having said a bunch of these things here, it's often said Putin plays chess while the U.S. plays checkers. Regarding the sanctions that followed, which then came on Russia, has it sort of backfired where the U.S. and the West is getting the worst end of the deal here?
Absolutely. So I like to say Putin plays chess, the Chinese play Go, and the United States plays Monopoly. So we just print money. So we're the banker. So we have gotten the worst end of the sanctions. So the ruble, best performing currency of the year, shot for 171 a few days after the sanctions went on. Then it's all the way down to 55 or so last I checked. Um, what we're doing, Europe is basically committing suicide here. So what we scream as like social justice warriors: stop the oil, stop the oil. We're paying Putin $1 billion a day. Yes, that's true, but you're in an $18 trillion economy. So does it make sense to pay the billion and keep your $18 trillion economy going, or not pay the billion and lose trillions of dollars in economic value every year? So at the heart of it, and this is what I refer to as a laptop class, they don't get it. When the factory shut down and the economy stops, you're not helping anybody. This war with Russia could last years. And by destroying your own economy, you're not helping anything. So the smart thing would just be keep buying the oil and gas and get those alternative sources ready as fast as you can. It's going to take 2 or 3 years, but that's the only, you're going to need economic growth and economic stability to even get that kind of stuff done.
Okay. Dan, you have spent quite a number of years in China. You know it very well. Would you say that Xi Jinping is playing a different level, a whole new level of chess or Go that the US may not have seen before, considering things like e-commerce, transactions, manufacturing, economic strength, and global growth, technology, and so far? Is just is this really a totally different level that China is on?
I think it is. I'm not a fan of Xi. I think a lot of negative has come with his term, which has been maybe going to be a lifelong term now, almost back to a Maoism type of thing. And if we look at Chinese history, it wouldn't be surprising where they're just about to take over the world, and then some new dictator comes in and destroys it. So I'm not a big fan. I don't. China has risen. A lot of people don't understand. Chinese rose because of the Chinese people, not the government. So when I moved to China, 1998, the government kind of put their hands up and said, "You guys do whatever you want. I mean, we have no money for you." The military owned hotels to make money. The university, Tsinghua, where I was at, they started a phone company to make money. They have no government funding. So, China starved 50, 60 million people to death in the Great Leap Forward due to incompetence, not on purpose. They realized they didn't know how to do it. They were smart, learn by doing, as Mao used to say. Cross the river one stone at a time. They copied Singapore. They looked at Singapore as a model. They looked, went all over the world studying this, put in gradual reforms. But at the end of the day, it was taking the handcuffs off the Chinese workers and the Chinese entrepreneurs that led to the massive rise in China. Now you go back 5, 6 years ago, I think the leadership's cocky. They like to take credit for this and all that. At the end of the day, they didn't do it. So foreign policy wise, yeah, they are running circles around the U.S. I have met with a lot of Chinese government officials. You'd be shocked at what they know. Oh yeah, this industry is located in Stuttgart. Oh yeah, that industry's over there. The U.S. guys spend all their time fundraising. They don't have a clue how things happen. You know, so you look at the South China Sea. We talked about an Asia pivot. We're going to contain China. And what do we do? What if China went out and built islands? Now they have a full command and control of the South China Sea. So while we're talking about it, they're doing something. So yes, they're running full circles around us. And the real hard economic power and military power is surpassed the U.S. The military is not there yet. They don't have the bases globally, but in the Asia Pacific, they have far surpassed the U.S. military wise. And yeah, that's the situation.
Okay, we'll touch on that one also in just a bit. Recently, Apple has said that they're looking to move some of their manufacturing to other nations, such as Vietnam, and this in part has to do with the lockdowns. But Dan, how significant do you think ASEAN countries, the Association of Southeast Asian Networks, ASEAN, will become as manufacturing hubs and refining hubs as a challenge to China?
Won't be a challenge. I think they can be complementary. So Vietnam, I'm quite positive on Vietnam. I think Vietnam is where China was 20 years ago. I think they're going to be a very big powerhouse in manufacturing, but their population is 1/15th. They're just not very big. A lot of other ASEAN countries are tiny. They're smaller, like a Chinese city or smaller, with the exception of probably Indonesia, which is obviously big. Um, ASEAN, I think, has a bright future. I think all Asia generally has a pretty good future ahead, if they can avoid conflicts. A lot of manufacturing move, but to give the example on this iPhone, so you can do final assembly in Vietnam, but it doesn't help much. So most of the IP nowadays in an iPhone is South Korean, Taiwanese, or Chinese. It's not even American, and it's all built in China. So you have to have those suppliers as well building in Vietnam, which I doubt they all are, but it's always a first phase to move at least the final assembly out. But without that completely integrated value chain, you're always going to be dependent on Chinese manufacturing.
Okay. And we kind of touched on this as well. China has been island hopping in the Pacific or South Pacific. Recently, it has signed a security agreement with the Solomon Islands, and no question the Solomon Islands are strategic militarily wise. In the US and its influence, or is the US and its influence starting to be displaced in the Pacific and throughout the world?
Yeah, so this one has the Australians in particular a little bit freaked out, because eventually you're going to have Chinese military bases right above them. They are, I mean, we're playing the game of the Quad, so we're trying to group countries against China. It's only natural China is going to build a Belt and Road and try to get as many countries in their orbit. A place like Solomon Islands, I say go for it. Some of these island countries are so backwards, China could completely raise everybody's living standards with ease without even a problem. Problem is, eventually will be a military clash. So Australia, as you probably know, Australia and China's relationship has gone really bad the last year or two, and China was their biggest customer for everything. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, it's stay tuned. It won't be just Solomon Islands. China will build a network of bases all over the world at some point.
Okay. Moving on, what I'm going to do now is take in some questions that I had seen come up. Let's see. A guy just wants to know if you've read Ray Dalio's book. He says in chapter 6, as for investing, sell out of all sell out of all debt and buy gold because wars are financed by borrowing and printing too much money, which values debt and money. What would you say to that? Have you read it by chance?
I have not read it. I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of some of the chapters. I've seen a lot of people talk about it, but I've not read it. Um, I mean, he is right. All wars are fine. That's why printing money is one of the root evils of humanity. Because if you didn't have printed money, you'd never have a 20-year war in Afghanistan. If you wanted to say, like for today, submit 50 billion in weapons to Ukraine and send every taxpayer in the U.S. a bill right now, they wouldn't do it. Likewise, in Russia, if you sent every citizen a bill there to invade Ukraine, they wouldn't agree to it. The printed money allows all wars to happen, and that's at the root evil of so many things if you really analyze it. So I agree with Ray Dalio on that point. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let me go back to another question. I got to pull this up from a different feed here. What do you think China will do with all their U.S. Treasury holdings?
So it's an interesting one, right? Go back a few years, we were all concerned. Oh my God, China's owns $1 trillion in treasuries, number one holder of foreign treasuries. What if they just sell them? That was $1 trillion. I think at their high, they got to about $1.1 trillion. Then the financial crisis came and we just printed trillions like it's nothing. Like it didn't matter. What's $1 trillion anymore, right? We printed 20 trillion. How many did we print last year? I mean, we're just stuffing people with money last year, $20 trillion or something. So China hasn't added to their treasury since 2018. They haven't bought a Boeing plane since 2018. That
Wow.
used to be their biggest import. So I think at this point, China's just ready to write it off. What they were doing of obviously they're trying to buy the treasuries to keep the RMB low, to keep the manufacturing stable. Because in a world of these fiat currencies that are constantly bouncing up and down against each other, you can't do proper commerce. You can't be a factory guy, lock in a contract, and then have it adjust 15% in a month. So China on purpose kept the RMB pegged to the dollar with their kind of show fluctuations. Um, but yeah, it's I, you know, kind of that's what it is.
Okay. Let me pull up another question here. Todd says, "Who will buy all China stuff when the USA goes bankrupt?" And this is interesting because I think China has shifted GDP wise more from an export nation to a consumption type of a nation.
Yep. This is a key point that a lot of people don't. We see everything's made in China, right? On our shelves, everything's from China. So we instantly assume, oh, China needs us. China, they don't really need us anymore. U.S. is about 20% of their global exports. Only 20%. They could live with that. We couldn't. We would have nothing on the shelves. So who's going to buy it? Yeah. So China domestically, also, if you talk to the entrepreneurs, why don't you go set up factories in Europe or why don't you go set up factories in the US? They don't care. The domestic market's so big that if you just capture 5% of the domestic market, you can't do anything else. It's just too big. So, yeah, it's been a real shift over the last several years where before it was export, 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 get the foreign currency earned. That's what the business, they got the VAT, pullback. So they were making good money on exports. That's all been taken away. Mostly they've reduced FAT rebates. They don't care anymore. It's all domestic market, mostly in China.
Okay, another question here. I'll pull in from a different feed. Do you get the feeling that China is playing the dollar standard game to extract the most benefit for its people? It seems that China is not ready to let the dollar tank, given how well it is doing, even with the dollar as a reserve currency.
Sure, I think all of Asia played that game. So Japan played the game. Japan always fluctuated their yen against the dollar. If it got too expensive, they crashed it. The Chinese did the same thing. The dollar used to be backed by this. So this is an interesting thing. We talk about King Dollar, and I've always talked about the petro yen is going to replace King Dollar. Reason why is dollars used to be priced from oil. It was backed by the U.S. military and it was backed in oil, right? You could buy oil with dollars. Today, Saudi Arabia, 22% of their oil sales is to China, 3 or 4% to the U.S. They don't ship anything to us anymore. So the oil flows globally will shift over to RMB. And we've only helped that with these recent sanctions, right? With shift to rubles now. European oil flows are in rubles. China will put them in yuan. So you got the end of King Dollar where you had all that excess artificial demand to buy dollars. Also, our global trade has gone way down, relative to every other place. So you've got all that artificial previous demand for the dollars will no longer be there. People will become net buyers of treasuries and to become net sellers.
Okay, it's a great point there. Another question from a different feed. Sorry about this. We're not hearing much about Evergrande anymore. That whole debacle that went on. At the onset of the news, people likened the Evergrande fallout to the next Lehman crisis. Why hasn't the Evergrande issue caused a great financial crisis over in China?
So I told people on Twitter about Evergrande, and I said, "Just forget about it. Don't worry about it. It's nothing. It's the same thing as people are predicting a housing crash in China for 20 some years. It's ridiculous. This whole time I've been telling people buy Chinese property. So Evergrande, what happens is, well, here's the real story. So their credit gets pulled from the Chinese banking sector. Why is that? We don't really know who owns it, but the speculation is Jiang Zemin's clan owns a big share of it, right? These Chinese conglomerates, nobody knows who actually owns it. So she's at war with some of these giant business conglomerate families, and he's pulled their funding, so they had to sell. Has the market been great this year? No, housing's been terrible with COVID, but you make so much money on Chinese property, you'd be shocked if someone went bankrupt. I mean, they build those things for 2,000 RMB a square meter and sell them for 30,000 RMB a square meter. So the instantly a Chinese property developer going bankrupt would surprise me. I mean, they make stupid investments, of course, so that could happen. But that was a power politics game at its behind, and China was never going to let it fester into some systemic collapse. They really worked. All the local governments got involved. If a local government had an Evergrande property, they bought it, they managed it, they finished it, they resold it. Case closed.
Okay. Dan, would you say one difference also is that with the U.S., you have all these lobbyists. They go in, they fund politicians. Politicians take the money for their elections, but they kind of owe these companies something now that got them in office. Is it the same way in China where you can actually have companies go in and pay politicians to lobby for them?
So kind of a different system. It's not really a lobbyist system, but China is, I always say, ruled by man, not ruled by law. So yeah, there's laws, there's courts, but at the end of the day, it's how big is your political cover, your umbrella. As the Russians say, you need a political umbrella to get all these big projects. Some guy high up. So that works nationally and it works locally. Who knows who? I had one time I had Jiang Zemin's son supposedly call me, want to do a joint venture with one of the companies I was managing. And yeah, I'm so and so, we're working with Jiang Zemin's son, so you got to do it. That kind of thing. So that of course that kind of political corruption has gone on forever. And she really tried to stamp that out. And he did a lot when he came in and stamped out a lot of it. But obviously he stamped out his enemies. I mean, obviously his family, I'm sure, are billionaires as well. But yeah, it's corruption's everywhere.
Yeah. You sure that wasn't Biden's son giving you a call there? No, but
It could have been right.
but another question from a different feed. People are fascinated with all the ghost cities that was built in China. Some people call it, they were malinvestments and such. Were they investments, or were they things that are going to help to spur on China's economy?
So it was both. A lot of people didn't realize, and I called the ghost story cities false mostly at the time. You have to realize how fast China was developing. I lived in Pudong at one time. There was nobody there. Like 99, 2000, everything's brand new. Stock market's there, and you could walk on the weekend. Wouldn't be a car on the street. And now it's packed, people to wall to wall people. Same in Suzhou. So what China would do when they get a plan together, then we're going to redevelop this area of the city. We're going to move the government offices there. They contract everything out: schools, hospitals, apartment condos, you name it. And it all gets built in 6 months. So it's boom, it's up, it's sold. It's all sold and it's up in 6 months. So people see these empty cities and think, oh my God, ghost cities. Oh my God,
Yeah.
malinvestment. It wasn't really true. Now, there are cases in areas. You go out to the tier three areas, tier two, tier three, lower level cities. Ordos is one example. That was a big ghost city. So there are areas of malinvestment where they have a plan and they build stuff and nobody comes. So it's yes and no on both counts.
Okay, I guess we'll be wrapping up here. One of the last questions I'll have is war on China's mind? Are they looking to invade and dominate militarily?
I don't think so. I mean, if you just let's step back and look at the facts. China hasn't got involved in a war since the mid 70s, whereas the U.S. is constantly at war. So you don't see the foreign military bases. China doesn't have it. China was still traumatized by the invasion period of World War II. They have a very strict concept of not interfering in other countries' business. So they realize how hurt they were by that, and they kind of hold that up as a bulwark of their foreign policy. That being said, China is now very exposed to the global system. They need the oil, they need the food. They are going to end up. The Belt and Road is all about expanding the network over to Iran, over to Saudi. They're building a new city in Pakistan where it's going to sit right outside, and they're going to have a Navy base and a military base going to watch all the oil flows. So they're going to protect their own interest. I think, do they want war? Absolutely not. The biggest flashpoint is Taiwan. As long as you leave Taiwan, even my Taiwan friends ask me, would you tell Americans to shut the hell up? I mean, this is getting out of control. As long as we don't poke the dragon over Taiwan, I think business will stay as usual. But Taiwan is completely dependent on China, mainland China, for business. So we have to keep peace on the Taiwan Strait. So we need to leave it alone. But and Taiwanese at this point would just like rather keep the current system. They don't want to get invaded. If you poke China too far, they will invade Taiwan. There's no doubt about it.
All right, Dan Collins, that's a lot of great info that you gave there. I think before the whole the global bug pandemic, we saw this whole movement in Hong Kong as well, where there was a lot of poking going on. So all right, we'll kind of see what goes on with Taiwan. But Dan Collins, we thank you for your time. We appreciate your insight, and can you let the people know how they can follow more of your work and of course your YouTube channel?
Sure, YouTube, you could find me at Chaos Inc. and then maybe type in Dan Collins as well. And Twitter, I think I'm Dan Collins 2011.
Okay. All right, Dan, we appreciate your time. And what I'll do is I'll let you go from here, and then I'll wrap up the show with the viewers. So again, thanks for coming, and I'll let you go. Thanks again, Dan. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me. Cheers,
All right.
everybody.
Cheers. Thank you also, Dan.
Take care.
Oops. Okay. Oops. Sorry about that. Yeah. So that was Dan Collins. I mean, I think he gave a very interesting look on China. A lot of times, we may not understand it. We're just going off of whatever the media says. A lot of it is emotionally charged. So it's good to hear Dan's views from someone who is actually on the ground, lived there 20 plus years, understands the way we think in the US, understands the way they think in China. So I'm glad you folks had this chance to spend with me. Okay, Sarah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Um, I have one of the US money printers. Yeah. I need to, where'd you buy it from? Walmart? I need to buy one of those too. We appreciate you supporting us as well. Thank you very much. The thumbs ups are greatly appreciated also. But with that, we spent an hour with you folks. Again, we thank Dan for being on, and we're just trying to give you different viewpoints. Dan is one of the guys who you may or may not have heard from, and he's definitely up there, top tier level with just about everyone else. So appreciate it. That's gonna be it. We're gonna be wrapping up the show. Let me just look through these comments real quick here before we do so. You're welcome, guys. Jay Delaney, you're welcome. Built for Tough, all of you are welcome. Carlos, thank you. Appreciate that. Peter Frohwein, thank you. Appreciate it. So with that, let's see what we can do next week and bring out for you folks. As always, take care of each other. Be a blessing, not a burden. And saddle up for what's coming ahead and silver up as well. I will see you guys next week. Take care, everyone.